Chapter 21. Today, Professor Roosevelt announces, her pale hazel eyes gleaming with something that might be mischief. We are going outside. Harry sits up straighter, curious. A ripple of excitement passes through the classroom, quickly followed by a wave of groans as students glance toward the frost-rimed windows. In this, someone mutters from the back. Gather your cloaks and leave your books, she continues, already striding toward the door. My cloak's still damp from yesterday, Neville Longbottom says mournfully to no one in particular. Pansy Parkinson's nose wrinkles. She can't be serious. It's snowing, Blaze observes, as if Professor Roosevelt might not have noticed. Draco is already on his feet, unbothered. Harry notices he didn't even reach for his gloves. Harry pulls his cloak from the back of his chair, the warm one, with the fur-lined hood that had appeared in his trunk at the start of term. No note attached, but made in that same elegant style he'd come to associate with Loki. The cold hits them the moment they step outside. Harry's breath fogs in the air, and he feels Yer coiled tighter against his chest beneath his robes. Cold, she hisses, her small voice sharp with accusation. Too cold. Her head pokes out from his collar, then immediately retreats. Ice falling from the sky. That's snow, Harry explains. Make it stop. Harry sighs and catches Professor Roosevelt's attention as the class assembles. Professor, could you please cast a warming charm on my familiar? She doesn't do well in the cold. Professor Roosevelt glances at the small silver head now stubbornly buried against Harry's neck, and her expression softens. Of course, Mr. Potter, a quick wand movement and a murmured incantation, and warmth spreads through Yer's scales. Yer stills. Then slowly her head emerges again. Oh, this is nice. She flicks her tongue at the falling snow, no longer offended by it. Yes, I like this. The cold is pretty now. The class follows Professor Roosevelt out across the grounds, past the greenhouses, and toward a stretch of open space near the lake. Defense against the dark arts, Professor Roosevelt says once they've assembled, is not just about learning spells. It's about survival. And survival begins with awareness. She gestures to the open space around them. I have hidden 12 objects within this area. Some are enchanted to make noise when you get close. Others will shoot harmless sparks if you step on them. A few are simply there, waiting to be noticed. The students look around nervously, suddenly aware of how exposed they are. Harry looks down at the ground, trying to spot anything unusual. But Professor Roosevelt has clearly been thorough. Snow is churned up from her preparations, footprints layering over footprints, until the whole field looks equally disturbed. Your task is simple. Navigate from here to that tree. She points to a massive oak tree about 50 yards away, without triggering any of the hidden dangers. You will be working in pairs. The pair that reaches the tree with the fewest triggers wins. What do we win? Blaze asks, ever practical. Professor Roosevelt smiles. The satisfaction of survival, Mr. Zabini. In the real world, that's the only prize that matters. And before anyone thinks of simply following the pair ahead of them, a knowing smile. The obstacles are charmed to shift after each triggering. What was safe a moment ago may not be safe now. Now, find a partner, she instructs. The class shuffles into groups. Harry moves toward Draco without thinking, and Draco falls into step beside him just as naturally. Across the group, Harry notices Ron Weasley take a step toward Finnegan, but Thomas is already there. Weasley turns toward Longbottom, but Hermione has linked arms with him. For a moment, Ron just stands there, looking lost. Before the Howler, Weasley never had trouble finding a partner. Finnegan, Thomas, Longbottom Somione was always willing. Now no one will meet his eyes, which leaves Weasley and Blaze standing on opposite sides of the group, very deliberately not looking at each other. Mr. Zabini, Mr. Weasley. Professor Roosevelt's voice cuts through the chatter. You're the only two without partners. In potions, I usually work alone, Blaze says smoothly, or join Potter and Odinson. This isn't potions, Mr. Zabini. Professor Roosevelt's pale eyes are sharp, and I said pairs, not trios. 5 points from Slytherin for poor sportsmanship. In a real crisis, you don't get to choose your allies. You work with who's available, or you don't survive. Pair up. Ron mutters something under his breath but doesn't argue. Neither of them moves. Now, they shuffle toward each other like they're approaching something contagious. Harry feels Yer stir beneath his sleeve. What are we doing? She asks, sounding much more agreeable now that she's warm. There are hidden things on the field. We have to find them before we step on them. Yer's tongue flicks out, tasting the air. Hidden things, she asks with interest. I can help. See things, hear things, smell things. Harry glances at Draco. Yer says she can help. She can sense things we might miss. Draco's eyes light up. Brilliant. Have her scout ahead. Harry kneels and lets Yer slide from his sleeve onto the snow. Her white and silver scales blend seamlessly, making her nearly invisibly. The glint of ice-blue eyes betrays her position. Go slowly, Harry tells her. Tell me if you feel anything strange. Obviously. Yer replies with what Harry has come to recognize as snake sarcasm. She slithers forward, tongue flicking constantly as they all set off across the field. A shriek from somewhere to their left, lavender brown, sparks shooting up around her ankles as Parvati tries not to laugh. Yer freezes. Stop. Warm thing. Here. Her tongue flicks toward a patch of snow that looks identical to every other patch. Go around this spot, Harry tells Draco. Neville Longbottom hasn't even made it 10 feet before a burst of purple sparks erupts at his ankles. He sighs, unsurprising, and keeps going. Hermione, his partner, is already scanning the ground ahead with fierce concentration. Parkinson shrieks as something makes a loud honking noise beneath her boot. This is ridiculous, she hisses, cheeks flushed. Metal. Smells fizzy. Harry glances to where Yer's head is pointing, right side, something enchanted. A fountain of golden sparks shoots up near Finnegan, and Thomas is doubled over laughing beside him. I didn't touch anything, Bulstrode insists, as a shrill whistle follows her every step. It's following me. Draco's sharp eyes catch a shimmer in the air that even Yer hadn't noticed. Their illusion. See how the snow doesn't quite sit right? Harry squints. He can't see anything, but he trusts Draco. They give the spot a wide berth. Hermione and Longbottom are making slow but steady progress. Hermione looks determined, while her partner looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Still, they've only triggered 2. Somewhere on the far side of the field, Weasley and Blaise are making disastrous progress. Harry can hear them arguing from 20 feet away. There's something there, left, Blaise says flatly. A whistle shrieks. Oh, I meant right. Blaise's voice is silk smooth. You did that on purpose. Prove it. Harry glances over just as another trap triggers. This time it sounds like a foghorn that startles the nearby pairs into stumbling. Weasley's ears are scarlet, his fists clenched at his sides. I smell nothing bad, Yer reports. They're nearly to the oak when Harry's boot comes down on something solid. A high-pitched whistle shrieks through the air, making them both flinch. Not my fault, Yer says immediately. That one had no smell. Rock, Draco observes, once Harry's heart stops pounding. No heat, no magic trace until you're on it. They reach the oak tree, just one trigger. Harry allows himself a small smile. Behind them, Weasley's voice is loud enough to carry, forget it. I'll do it myself. He storms ahead, no longer bothering to avoid anything, triggering a cascade of noise with every step. Mr. Weasley, Professor Roosevelt's voice rings out. 10 points from Gryffindor for abandoning your partner. Weasley doesn't stop. He trudges forward through a chorus of whistles and pops, shoulders hunched, ears burning red. Blaise picks his way to the oak tree alone, expression satisfied. He'd lost 5 points, but Gryffindor lost 10. From the look on his face, he'd gotten exactly what he wanted. Professor Roosevelt makes a note on her parchment as each pair arrives, her quill scratching quietly. When she reaches Harry and Draco, her eyebrows rise. 1 trigger. Impressive, Mr. Potter, Mr. Odinson. Her pale hazel eyes flick to the snow where Yer is making her way back to Harry. 10 points to Slytherin for creative use of resources. Isn't it cheating? Hermione asks from nearby, looking slightly miffed. She and Longbottom had triggered 4. It's survival, Miss Granger. Professor Roosevelt's voice carries to the whole class. In a dangerous situation, you use every advantage available to you. Mr. Potter has a familiar with abilities most wizards lack. Using those abilities isn't cheating, it's merely resourcefulness. Something I hope the rest of you will demonstrate in future exercises. Harry feels his cheeks warm as he scoops Yer up and lets her coil around his wrist. You did well, he tells her. I know, she settles against his skin, radiating smug satisfaction. Very good, very helpful. Very hungry, she bumps her head against his fingers. Egg now. Harry fishes a quail egg from the pouch at his belt. Yer swallows it whole and settles contentedly around his wrist. For about 3 seconds. Another, she says. I found many things. You're going to get fat, Harry murmurs. We'll not get fat, we'll get magnificent. Draco glances over. Is she asking for more food? How did you know? She always is. One more, Yer says immediately. One is enough for now. I worked very hard. Many dangers, many smells, Yer pouts. Later, Harry promises. Yer huffs but settles against his wrist, apparently willing to wait. As they head back toward the castle, Harry glances over his shoulder. Ron is trailing far behind the rest of the class, alone. The other Gryffindors walk in clusters ahead of him, and not one of them looks back. Harry turns away before Ron can catch him staring. Ron Weasley had never known the Gryffindor common room could be so quiet. It wasn't actually quiet, of course. There was the usual chatter, the crackling of the fire, the scratch of quills on parchment. But the moment Ron stepped through the portrait hole, all of it seemed to die. Conversations faltered, eyes darted away. Someone coughed awkwardly. And then, as if on cue, the noise resumed, but wrong somehow. Too bright, too deliberate. The kind of noise people made when they were very carefully not looking at someone. Ron crossed to his usual armchair by the fire. It was empty, which was strange Dean, and Seamus usually claimed it for exploding snap after dinner. But they were huddled on the far side of the room instead, their games spread out on a table that put as much distance between them and the fireplace as possible. He sat down anyway, pretended to read a Quidditch magazine. The words blurred in front of his eyes. It's been days since his mother's voice had echoed through the great hall, screaming about shame and disgrace and speaking ill of the dead. It felt like he'd become the most hated person in school. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The interview had been brilliant. A real reporter, Rita Skeeter herself, had sought him out during the Christmas holiday. Not Bill with his curse-breaking adventures, not Charlie with his dragons, not Percy with his perfect grades or the twins with their pranks or even Ginny, the baby, the only girl, the one everyone always cooed over. Him, Ron, the forgotten middle child, the one who was just Ron. You poor dear, Rita had said, her acid-green quick quotes quill hovering eagerly over her parchment. It must have been terrifying, being attacked by the boy who lived himself. And that snake, you must have nightmares. Ron had puffed up at the sympathy. Finally, someone who understood. Someone who saw that he was the victim here. And all because you tried to warn him about the Malfoy boy, Rita had continued, her eyes glittering behind her jeweled spectacles. How brave of you. Tell me everything. So Ron had told her about the train, about Potter's snake, about how Odinson had sneered at him. He had, hadn't he? Ron was pretty sure he had. He'd held up Scabbers for the photograph, clutching his pet protectively to his chest. And what did you say to them? Rita had asked, her voice full of curiosity. Before the attack, Ron had hesitated. But Rita's smile was so encouraging, and she'd been so nice, and it felt so good to have someone on his side. I just said something about Odinson's mum, something my uncle said once. Oh, the quick quotes quill had scratched faster. What was that, dear? And Ron had told her. The words that Uncle Bilious had said. The words that had made his mother slap his uncle and threaten to curse him. Ron had repeated them to a reporter because she'd smiled at him and called him brave and made him feel like he mattered. Rita's quill had paused just for a heartbeat and then scratched even faster than before. How awful for you, dear, to be attacked just for repeating something you heard. She'd shaken her head sympathetically. And poor Harry Potter, the boy who lived, taken in by the same man who stole the Malfoy heir. You must have noticed things, Ronald. You're clearly very observant. Has Harry ever said anything that concerned you? Done anything? Odd. Ron had talked for another 20 minutes. About Harry's parcel tongue, about the snake, about how Odinson acted like he was better than everyone. Rita had nodded along, her quill never stopping. The article had called him a victim of the rising darkness at Hogwarts. There was a whole paragraph about the dangers of Parselmouths and another about the Malfoy family's Death Eater connections. Ron had read it 4 times, grinning at his own photograph. For one glorious day, people had looked at him, pointed, whispered. Not in the way they whispered about the twins' pranks or Percy's prefect badge. This was different. This Worcestery, his moment. And then Draco Odinson had stood on a table in the great hall and ruined everything. And then the howler came. It wasn't even his fault, not really. He'd been repeating something Uncle Bilius had said, and yeah, Mum had slapped Uncle Bilius for it, and Dad had gone all stiff and angry, but Ron had been provoked. Odinson had been sitting there all smug with his fancy clothes and his Malfoy hair, and Potter had that creepy snake, and Ron had just wanted to knock them down a peg, to show them they weren't better than him. And then Potter had punched him, actually physically attacked him. And somehow Ron was the villain. It was just words. Words that Uncle Bilius had said first. How was he supposed to know you couldn't say things like that? He was just a kid. His uncle was a grown adult and he'd said it. But nobody cared about that. Nobody cared that Ron was the victim here, that Potter had assaulted him, and Odinson had just watched with that cold look on his face. They only cared that Ron had said something about a dead woman. A lucky bastard whose father took him in after his whore mother died. The words echoed in his head, sounding different now than they had on the train. Uglier. His stomach twisted. He shoved the memory away, and the magazine crumpled in his grip. Across the room, Lavender Brown was whispering to Parvati Patil. They both glanced his way, then quickly looked elsewhere. Ron felt his ears burn. The portrait hole swung open, and Fred and George entered. Ron sat up slightly, a flicker of hope rising in his chest. His brothers, at least, would they walked right past him. Not a glance, not a nod, not even one of their usual stupid jokes. Fred murmured something to George, who snorted, and then they were gone up the stairs to the boys' dormitory. Ron stared at the empty space where they'd been. Fine, fine. He didn't need them anyway. He didn't need any of them. They were all taking Potter's side because Potter was famous, and Odinson was rich, and Ron was just his eyes stung. He blinked hard and looked down at Scabbers, who was curled in his pocket. The rat's nose twitched, whiskers trembling. "At least you're still here," Ron muttered, stroking the rat's patchy fur. "You don't care what anyone says, do you?" Scabbers squirmed, trying to burrow deeper into Ron's pocket. He'd been doing that a lot lately, hiding, twitching, trying to escape whenever Ron wasn't holding him firmly enough. Probably stressed from all the upheaval. Ron knew how he felt. It got worse. The next morning at breakfast, Ron sat at the end of the Gryffindor table, alone. There was a conspicuous gap between him and the nearest cluster of students, at least 3 seats of empty space, like he had a contagious disease. Percy walked past without looking at him, not quite ignoring him in the same way the twins did. This was disappointment. Percy had expectations, and Ron had failed to meet them, and now Percy, who cared so much about appearances, wouldn't even act like they were related in public. That hurt worse than the twins, somehow. Ron stabbed at his eggs. He wasn't hungry, but he had to do something with his hands or he'd scream. At the Slytherin table, he could see Potter and Odinson eating breakfast like nothing had happened, laughing about something. That know-it-all Granger girl from Gryffindor was hovering nearby, and even she seemed more welcome at the snake table than Ron was at his own. Odinson had stood on a table and called Ron a coward and a liar in front of the whole school, and everyone had believed him. Ron wanted to march over there and shove that smug look right off Odinson's face. See how superior he acted with a bloody nose. But Odinson was always with other Slytherins, and Potter had that snake. And the last time Ron had tried to say anything, Potter had punched him, and everyone had acted like Ron deserved it. Hugh was the one who got attacked. Hugh was the one whose mum sent a howler, and somehow Hugh was the villain. It wasn't fair. His fork scraped against the empty plate. He hadn't realized he'd eaten everything. Scabbers squirmed in his pocket again, letting out a thin squeak. Ron reached down to soothe him, but the rat's heart was pounding so fast Ron could feel it through his fur. "What's wrong with you lately?" Ron murmured. Scabbers didn't answer. Obviously. He was a rat, but his beady eyes were fixed on the entrance to the great hall, and he wouldn't stop trembling. After a week, Ron had stopped going to the common room. It was easier this way. No awkward silences. No whispers that cut off when he walked in. No seeing the twins laugh with Lee Jordan and knowing he wasn't welcome to join. He found other places to pass the time instead. An empty classroom on the fourth floor that nobody seemed to use. A dusty alcove behind a tapestry of gnomes learning ballet. He'd stay out until just before curfew, then slip back through the portrait hole when the common room was mostly empty, and go straight up to the dormitory before anyone could pointedly not look at him. The other boys were usually already in bed by then, or at least pretending to be. Ron would change in the dark, climb into his four-poster, and pull the curtains shut. Neville had noticed, probably. Neville noticed things, even if he rarely said anything. But he hadn't told anyone, and Ron hadn't offered an explanation, and they'd reached an unspoken agreement to pretend everything was normal. It wasn't normal. Nothing was normal. Ron lay in his bed, curtains drawn tight, staring at the canopy above him. Scabbers was pressed against his neck, trembling again, always trembling now. The rat barely ate, barely slept, barely did anything except shake and try to hide. "SHH," Ron whispered. "SHH, it's okay, we're okay." He didn't believe it, but Scabbers was all he had left. He held the rat closer and waited for morning. The screaming started just after midnight. Minerva was out of bed and through her office door before she was fully awake, wand in hand, tartan dressing gown hastily thrown over her nightclothes. The sound was coming from the common room entrancino, from the corridor beyond it. She emerged through the back passage to find chaos. Students in pajamas, prefects trying to maintain order, Gryffindors milling about in the corridor because they couldn't get back into their own common room. The fat lady's portrait had been slashed to ribbons. Great gouges ran across the canvas, deep enough to expose the wall behind. The frame hung crooked, splinters of gilded wood scattered across the stone floor. And the fat lady herself was gone, fled to another portrait somewhere in the castle, too hysterical to speak. "Everyone back," Minerva's voice cut through the chaos. "Prefects, keep your students together. No one is to leave this corridor until I say otherwise." She approached the ruined portrait, her heart pounding beneath her stern exterior. Impossible. Professor Roosevelt had assured them the wards would hold. Had walked the perimeter herself, cast spells Minerva didn't recognize, and declared Hogwarts impenetrable to Sirius Black. And yet, Minerva! Dumbledore's voice was quiet as he appeared at her side, but it carried. "What has happened? See for yourself, headmaster." She didn't bother to hide the edge in her voice. "It seems our new professor's assurances were optimistic." Dumbledore studied the slashed canvas, his expression unreadable. "Find her. We need to know who did this." It took 20 minutes to locate the fat lady. She had taken refuge in a landscape painting on the second floor, cowering behind a hippopotamus and weeping so violently that the other painted figures had retreated to the edges of their frames. "It was him," she wailed when Dumbledore approached. "Sirius Black. He was here demanding I let him in. I told him no, I told him he couldn't come in without the password, and she dissolved into sobs." Dumbledore turned to face the staff, his eyes hard as flint. "Search the castle. Every room, every passage, every hidden corner. Phileas, seal the entrances. Pomona, check the greenhouses. Severus, the dungeons," Snape said, already moving. "And the students?" Minerva asked. "The Great Hall, all of them." Tonight, Harry lay between Draco and Blaze, staring up at the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall and not sleeping. Around them, every student in Hogwarts was packed into sleeping bags. Prefects patrolled the aisles. Professors guarded every door. Draco, of course, was unconscious. Getting him here had been a nightmare. His friend slept like the dead and needed his full 7 hours, or he was useless. Harry and Blaze had practically carried him from the dormitory. The moment he'd hit the sleeping bag, he was out again. Harry envied him. His own mind wouldn't stop racing. Sirius Black had been here, in the castle, right outside Gryffindor Tower. It doesn't make sense, Hermione whispered from nearby. She positioned her sleeping bag close to theirs, ignoring the looks from some of her Gryffindor housemates. Everyone knows you're in Slytherin, Harry. The whole wizarding world knows. So why would Black go to Gryffindor? Maybe he's mad, Blaze murmured. Years with the Dementors. It's a wonder he can remember his own name. Beside Harry, Draco let out a soft snore, still dead to the world. Harry said nothing. He was thinking about how Loki had told him that his lost speakers were investigating Sirius Black's case, because there had never been a trial. Across the hall, he could see a cluster of red hair. The Weasleys were grouped together near the Gryffindor section. The prefect sat upright, still wearing his badge. The twins were whispering, their usual humor replaced by something serious. And Weasley was at the edge of the group, curled on his side, back to his brothers, clutching something small against his chest. His rat, probably. He looked smaller than Harry remembered, lonelier. Harry turned away. He didn't want to feel sorry for Weasley, not after everything. But something about the hunched shape of him, the way even his own family kept their distance seat, was hard to look at. He stared up at the ceiling instead, watching storm clouds churn. Somewhere in the castle, the professors were still searching. Black was still out there, wanting something badly enough to slash a portrait to ribbons. But he hadn't gotten in. Harry closed his eyes. Draco was here. Loki was somewhere in the castle. Whatever Black wanted, Harry wasn't facing it alone. He held on to that thought as he drifted towards sleep. Nearby, Ron Weasley wasn't sleeping either. He lay rigid in his sleeping bag, scabbers pressed against his chest, listening to the whispers die down around him. Sirius Black, in the castle, a real murderer right here at Hogwarts. Ron shivered. Everyone said Black was after Potter, the boy who lived, the one who defeated you-know-who. It made sense. Of course, a dark wizard would want revenge on the baby who destroyed his master. But Potter was in Slytherin, so why had Black gone to Gryffindor Tower? Ron didn't have an answer. He didn't want to think about it anymore. Scabbers squirmed against his chest, letting out a thin, frightened squeak. The rat had been like this for days now, trembling, trying to hide, barely eating. Ron had assumed it was stress from all the upheaval. Poor thing was probably picking up on Ron's own anxiety. "SHH," he whispered, stroking the rat's patchy fur. "It's okay, we're safe here." Scabbers didn't stop trembling, neither did Ron. The staff meeting was held in Dumbledore's office at 7 in the morning, before the students would be released from the Great Hall. Minerva had not slept. Neither, from the looks of it, had most of the staff. Pomona's usually cheerful face was drawn with exhaustion. Phileas kept rubbing his eyes. Even Severus, who always looked like he hadn't slept in years, seemed more haggard than usual. Only Roosevelt appeared unruffled. She stood near the window, posture perfect, expression coolly attentive. If she'd spent the night searching the castle alongside the others, it didn't show. Minerva found this deeply irritating. "The castle has been searched 3 times, Dumbledore said. There is no sign of Black. He appears to have fled after his encounter with the fat lady." "Fled where?" Minerva demanded. "How did he get in?" "The gates were sealed, the grounds patrolled, the wards," Severus cut in, his dark eyes fixed on Roosevelt. "The wards our esteemed colleague assured us would keep the students safe." Roosevelt turned her head slightly. "The wards are functioning exactly as intended." "Then how did Black walk into the castle and up to Gryffindor Tower?" Minerva's voice rose. "If your wards are functioning as intended, I shudder to think what failure looks like. The wards prevent entry to anyone with malicious intent toward the students. Roosevelt's voice was calm, precise. Black entered the grounds, the castle, and approached Gryffindor Tower. He was not repelled. Silence. "What are you saying?" Minerva asked slowly. "I am saying that Sirius Black does not intend harm to any student at this school." "Absurd," Severus said flatly. "Black is a murderer, a Death Eater. He betrayed the Potters, and yet the wards did not stop him." Roosevelt's gaze was steady. "The magic responds to intent, not reputation. Whatever Black wants, it is not to hurt a child." "Then what does he want?" Phileas asked quietly. "That is the question." Minerva shook her head. "You're suggesting we trust the wards, trust that a mass murderer means no harm." "I am suggesting we consider the evidence." Black approached Gryffindor Tower, not the Slytherin dormitories where Harry Potter actually sleeps. He demanded entry from the fat Lady Manded, not attacked. He only slashed the portrait when she refused, because she wouldn't let him in to murder students in their beds. A wizard capable of escaping Azkaban is not stopped by a painted woman saying no. He could have blasted through the wall. He didn't. Roosevelt tilted her head. He slashed the canvas in frustration and fled. "That's not the behavior of someone desperate to kill." Severus stepped forward. "You're defending him." "I am analyzing him. There is a difference." Her eyes met his, and something flickered in their deep scold and very old. "I have no love for murderers, but I have even less love for assumptions that blind us to the truth." "What would you have us do?" Dumbledore asked. "Continue the search. Increase security. Protect the students." She paused. "But ask ourselves why Black went to Gryffindor Tower when his supposed target sleeps in the dungeons. Until we understand what he wants, we cannot predict his next move." "Give me leave to search beyond the grounds," Severus said. "I knew him at school." "I can track him and do what?" Roosevelt's voice sharpened. "Duel him alone in the dark. Your courage is admirable, your judgment less so." Severus's face twisted, but Dumbledore raised a hand. "Enough. We will work together. We will protect the students. And we will discover what Black truly wants." He rose. "Additional security will be implemented. No student outside after dark. Prefects patrol in pairs. And the Dementors will not set foot on these grounds." Roosevelt's voice cut like a blade. "That is not negotiable." Minerva expected Dumbledore to push back. He didn't. "The Dementors will remain at the perimeter," he agreed, "as I have already informed the Ministry." Roosevelt inclined her head, acknowledging a point conceded. Minerva watched the exchange. There was something between those two, some history she didn't understand. The way Dumbledore deferred to Roosevelt on the Dementors, the way Roosevelt spoke without a trace of the respect most showed the great Albus Dumbledore. She filed it away. The meeting broke up. Severus swept out first, robes billowing, expression thunderous. The others drifted toward the door in murmuring pairs. Roosevelt remained by the window. Minerva paused at the door. "You truly believe he means no harm to the students?" Roosevelt didn't turn. "I believe the wards do not lie." "That's not the same thing." "No, it isn't." Minerva left without another word. She didn't trust Roosevelt's calm. She didn't trust the wards. And she certainly didn't trust that Sirius Black, mass murderer, had wandered into Hogwarts with no intention of hurting anyone. But she couldn't prove any of it. Not yet. Chapter 22. "Besides, you two will be fine," Blaise said, dropping a heavy tome on the library table. "You spar with a killer tree on weekends. I'm fairly certain you could take on an escaped convict." He'd meant it as a throwaway comment. Something to get them off the topic of Sirius Black, which they'd been circling for the better part of an hour. He had not anticipated Granger's reaction. Her head snapped up from her parchment. "What do you mean, spar with a killer tree?" Blaise glanced at Harry and Draco, who were both giving him looks that suggested he'd said something he shouldn't have. Apparently this wasn't common knowledge. Too late now. "The Whomping Willow," he said, settling into his chair. "They go out on Saturday mornings and let it try to kill them. For fun, apparently." "It's training," Draco corrected. "It builds reflexes." The whooping willow, Granger repeated slowly. The tree that was planted specifically because it attacks anything that comes near it. That whooping willow, that's the one. Blaze watched her expression shift from disbelief to calculation to something that looked almost hungry. He recognized that look. He'd seen it when she discovered the library had a restricted section. This was going to be trouble. "I want in," she said. Draco raised an eyebrow. "You want to fight a tree?" "I want to learn. Whatever you're doing, it's working. You are both better than anyone in defense class." She leaned forward, dropping her voice. "I refuse to be left behind just because I wasn't raised by people who actually know what they're doing." Blaze looked between the three of them, incredulous. "You want to wake up early, on a Saturday, to fight a tree, in the snow? On purpose?" "It's good training," Granger said, echoing Draco's earlier words. "It's insane." Blaze shook his head. "You're all insane. I'm surrounded by lunatics." He pulled his book closer and pointedly opened it. "Don't come crying to me when you get brained by a branch." He tried to focus on the chapter about flabberworm mucus applications, but the conversation continued around him. "It'll be cold," Draco warned. "We go early 7:30, before most people are up, and we run first." "I don't care." "I'll be there." Granger's voice had that fierce edge Blaze had learned meant she wasn't backing down. "I mean it. If you leave without me, I'll hex you both." "She really wants to fight a tree with us," Harry said, sounding amused. "That's what I said, isn't it?" Granger huffed. Draco sighed dramatically. "Fine, but if you complain about the cold, I'm leaving you behind." "I won't complain. Or the running. I'll keep up. Or the tree trying to kill you." There was a brief pause. Blaze glanced up just in time to see Granger's eyes widen slightly before she set her jaw. "I'll manage." "All right," Harry said. "Meet us at the entrance hall, Saturday, 7:30. I'll be there at 1:15. Granger looked deeply satisfied. "I'm never late," Draco snorted. "Of course you're not." Blaze turned a page he hadn't read. Lunatics, absolute lunatics. And yet, watching the three of them, Harry's quiet smile, Draco's reluctant approval, Granger's fierce determination, felt something that might have been envy. He squashed it immediately. Fighting a tree in the snow at 7:30 on a Saturday. No amount of camaraderie was worth that. The days after the break-in blurred together for Ron. He ate at odd hours, slipping into the great hall when it was nearly empty, grabbing food, and leaving before anyone could notice him. The house elves in the kitchens had started leaving plates out for him. He didn't know how they knew, but he was grateful not to have to ask. At night, he wandered. The castle was different after dark, quieter, emptier. The portraits dozed in their frames, the suits of armor stood motionless, and Ron could almost pretend he was the only person in the world. He found new hiding spots. A storage closet on the second floor, half filled with broken brooms. An alcove behind a tapestry of Wendelin the Weird. A disused bathroom on the fourth floor where the taps didn't work and no one ever came. He slept in snatches, curled up with his cloak and Scabbers, waking at every noise. Scabbers was getting worse. The rat barely ate now. He trembled constantly, pressing himself into the darkest corners of Ron's pockets, squeaking in distress whenever Ron tried to take him out. His fur was falling out in patches. His eyes were wild, darting, never still. "What's wrong with you?" Ron whispered one night, huddled in the broom closet. "You've been like this for weeks, ever since. Ever since the article, ever since Odinson's speech. Ever since the whole school turned against him. No, before that. Scabbers had started acting strange even before they came back from Christmas holiday. Right around when the news about Sirius Black had first broken. Ron frowned, trying to remember. Had Scabbers always been this jumpy? He'd had the rat for years, inherited from Percy, who'd never much cared for him, and Scabbers had always been lazy, sleepy, content to doze in Ron's pocket and eat scraps. Not anymore. Now he acted like something was hunting him. "It's okay," Ron murmured, stroking the patchy fur. "We're safe. The professors are looking for Black. He won't get in again." Scabbers squeaked and burrowed deeper into Ron's robes, his tiny heart hammering against Ron's chest. Ron closed his eyes and tried to sleep. He dreamed of black dogs with yellow eyes prowling through endless corridors. But by morning, the images had dissolved like fog, leaving only the cold and Scabber's frantic heartbeat against his chest. Saturday came faster than Hermione expected. She'd set 3 alarms a charm on her wand, a spelled parchment that vibrated and sheer force of will. The last one woke her at 7, 15 minutes before she needed to be up. The Gryffindor dormitory was dark and quiet. Lavender and Parvati were still buried under their covers and wouldn't stir for hours. Hermione dressed quickly in the warmest clothes she owned, layers upon layers, plus a hat she'd enchanted to retain heat, and crept down to the common room. Empty. The fire had burned down to embers. She slipped through the portrait hole before she could second-guess herself. Harry and Draco were already waiting in the entrance hall. Of course they were. Draco looked irritatingly awake for this hour, bouncing slightly on his heels. Harry was quieter, but alert, his breath fogging in the cold air that crept through the castle doors. "You came," Harry said, sounding pleased. "I said I would." Hermione lifted her chin. "I'm never late." 7:15, Draco noted. "Technically early. Technically prepared." Draco's lips twitched. "We'll see." "Come on, we run first." They slipped out onto the grounds, and the cold hit her immediately, sharper than she'd prepared for, despite the layers. Hermione pulled out her wand and cast a quick warming charm on herself, Focillo. It was third-year curriculum, technically, but useful enough that everyone should know it. A muffled hiss came from Harry's sleeve, sharp and indignant. "Sorry," Harry said to Hermione. "She wanted to come today. She says she needs to see how you move." "How I move?" "She thinks of the training as hunting." Harry looked slightly embarrassed. "She wants to know if you're a good hunting partner." More hissing from the sleeve, louder this time. "She needs a warming charm," Harry said. "I'm still not great at it, and Draco can't cast charms to save my life," Draco finished without shame. "It's a known issue." Hermione already had her wand out. She'd cast the same charm on herself not 30 seconds ago. "I've got it." She cast it with a slow, clockwise motion, aiming at the small silver head now poking indignantly from Harry's collar. The hissing stopped. Yer's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, and she settled against Harry's neck with what Hermione could only describe as a satisfied wiggle. "She says thank you," Harry said. "She did not," Draco said. "I know that tone." Hermione decided not to ask. "We do a lap around the lake," Harry explained. "Then stretches, then the tree." A lap around the lake. Hermione nodded as if this were perfectly reasonable and not absolutely mad. They started running. Within 5 minutes, Hermione's lungs were burning. Within 10, her legs felt like lead. Draco ran like it was effortless, his stride long and easy, barely breathing hard. Harry was steadier, pacing himself, but still faster than Hermione could manage. She refused to fall behind. This is what they do every week, she thought grimly, forcing her legs to keep moving. This is why they're better. By the time they finished the lap, the sun was cresting the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Hermione bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for air. "Not bad," Draco said. "You kept up." "I said," she wheezed, "I would." Harry handed her a water flask. "Stretches next. Then we'll show you the tree." The whooping willow stood at the edge of the grounds, its bare branches stark against the brightening sky. Even from a distance, Hermione could see it shifting restlessly, branches swaying in patterns that had nothing to do with the wind. "The trick," Draco said as they approached, "is to never stop moving. The moment you freeze, it hits you. How do you not get killed? You learn to read it. The branches telegraph before they swing." He rolled his shoulders. "Ready?" Hermione was absolutely not ready, but she nodded anyway. Draco darted forward, and the tree exploded into motion. Hermione watched, heart pounding, as he dodged and wove between the flailing branches. It was like a dancer, brutal and violent, but with a rhythm she could almost see. Harry joined him a moment later, the two of them moving in tandem, ducking and rolling and somehow never getting hit. "Your turn," Harry called, slightly breathless. Start slow, just try to get close and back away. Hermione took a breath, then another. She stepped forward. A branch whipped toward her head and she threw herself sideways, hitting the frozen ground hard. Pain shot through her shoulder. Again, Draco said. She got up, tried again, got knocked down again. You're thinking too much, Harry said. Don't react, don't plan. That was like telling her not to breathe. But she tried. Again and again, until her robes were covered in mud and frost, and her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. And somewhere around the 10th attempt, something clicked. She saw the branch coming actualisowit, the tiny shift in the trunk that preceded the swing end moved before her brain caught up. The branch whistled past her ear. She was still standing. There, Draco said, and he was almost smiling. That's it. Hermione's heart was pounding. Her shoulder throbbed. She was freezing and exhausted and probably bruised in a dozen places. She never felt more alive. On the morning everything changed, Ron woke at dawn. He hadn't meant to. His body was exhausted, wrung out from nights of broken sleep and days of pretending he didn't exist. But something had woken him, a sound, maybe, or just the prickle of unease that had become his constant companion. Scabbers was frantic. The rat was scrabbling at Ron's robes, trying to burrow deeper, squeaking in high-pitched terror. Ron grabbed him, trying to calm him, but Scabbers twisted and bit Actualibitham hard enough to draw blood. Ow, Scabbers! What the rat wriggled free and bolted. No, Scabbers, wait! Ron scrambled to his feet, clutching his bleeding hand, and ran after his pet. The rat was faster than Ron had ever seen him move, darting through the corridors toward the entrance hall, toward the grounds. Ron didn't think. He just ran. The castle was silent at this hour, the sky outside still gray with pre-dawn light. Ron burst through a side door and onto the grass, his breath fogging in the cold air, his eyes scanning desperately for a flash of gray fur. There, by the edge of the forbidden forest. Scabbers was running toward the trees, toward the darkness, and Ron was going to lose him. The only friend he had left. He sprinted across the lawn, not noticing the cold, not noticing the quiet, not noticing the large black dog that emerged from the shadows behind him. Hermione was a quick learner. Draco had to give her that. She'd hit the ground more times than he could count, but she kept getting back up, jaw set, eyes fierce, refusing to quit. It reminded him of himself, those first few months when his father had started training him. He'd been terrible too. Everyone was terrible at first. You're anticipating, he told her after another fall. Stop trying to predict, react. How do I react without predicting? Trust your body. Your mind is too slow for this, let it catch up later. It was what his father had told him over and over until the words had become instinct. Draco found himself teaching the way he'd been taught, patient, precise, never marking a failure, only pushing for better. His father would be proud, he thought, or at least amused. Harry demonstrated alongside him, the two of them moving in tandem while Hermione watched and tried again, and again. And then after nearly a dozen attempts started to get it. Hermione saw the branch coming and moved, not thought, not planned, just moved. The branch whistled past her ear. She was still standing. There, Draco said. That's it. The sun was just starting to rise now, painting the grounds in pale gold. Saturday morning, most of the castle was still asleep, enjoying the chance to lie in. They were cooling down, stretching, hissing something at Harry that made him snort. What did she say? Hermione asked. She says you're acceptable, for a first attempt. High praise from Draco added. She once told Harry he was too loud to ever catch anything worth eating. Hermione laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her, and Draco felt a flicker of something warm. This was good. This was how training should feel. His father always said that learning was better with others, that even the greatest warriors needed companions to sharpen themselves against. He was thinking about suggesting they try one more round when movement caught his isomion running, fast, away from the castle. Is that? Hermione squinted. Is that Ron Weasley? It was. The red hair was unmistakable against the snow. Weasley was sprinting away from the castle toward the edge of the forbidden forest, chasing something small and grey that darted across the white ground ahead of him. "What is he doing out here?" Harry muttered. Then Draco saw the dog. It was massive Eblac's shadow, emerging from the tree line with eerie silence. Weasley didn't see it. He was too focused on whatever he was chasing, his back to the creature as it loped toward him with terrible purpose. Draco's instincts screamed. This was no ordinary dog. It moved like a predator, like the wolves in his father's stories about Fenrir. "Weasley!" Draco shouted. "Behind you!" Weasley didn't hear, or didn't listen. He was still running, reaching for the dog lunged. It hit Weasley from behind, knocking him flat. Hermione screamed. Harry and Draco were already moving, sprinting across the grounds toward them. But the dog didn't attack. It grabbed Weasley by the back of his robes almost gently, like a mother cat carrying a kitten, and turned toward the whooping willow, toward them. "It's coming this way," Draco said. The dog was fast, impossibly fast, for something dragging a struggling boy. Draco barely had time to register what was happening before it was past them, Weasley's terrified face a blur as the dog dragged him toward the tree. The willow's branches were thrashing deadly, but the dog seemed to know exactly where to go. It ducked and weaved between the sweeping limbs, dragging Weasley toward the base of the trunk, and then it disappeared. One moment the dog was there, Weasley struggling in its grip. The next, they were simply gone, vanished into the shadows beneath the tree's massive roots. Where did they? Draco started. There must be an opening, a tunnel. Harry's voice was sharp. "Hermione, get Professor Roosevelt. Now." Hermione hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then she turned and ran toward the castle, faster than Draco had ever seen her move. Harry was already moving toward the tree. "We have to follow." Draco grinned. This was like something out of his father's story, a quest, a rescue, a monster to face. He'd been waiting for something like this. "Let's go," he said. The willow was in a frenzy now, branches whipping through the air with enough force to shatter bone. But they'd trained for this. Every Saturday morning, reading the patterns, learning the rhythm. It was like dancing through a storm. Branches screamed past Draco's head, grazed his shoulder, nearly took out his knees. He rolled, ducked, twisted his body, moving before his mind could catch up, exactly the way his father had taught him. Beside him, Harry matched him step for step, the two of them weaving through the chaos like they'd done this 100 times. Because they had. They were almost the base of the trunk, a dark gap between the roots. Draco threw himself forward and tumbled into darkness. He landed hard in the darkness, the wind knocked out of him. A moment later, Harry crashed down beside him, a tunnel under the whooping willow. Draco was already on his feet, brushing dirt from his robes. His heart was racing, not fear, just energy. Brilliant. "I wonder where it leads." Harry scrambled up, wand raised. Lumos. Light bloomed from his wand tip, illuminating packed dirt walls and a low ceiling stretching into darkness. Draco pulled out his own wand, then paused. "Right, charms. Here." Harry held out his free hand. "Hold your wand, I'll cast it." It was a trick they'd figured out months ago, Harry's magic, channeling through Draco's wand, bypassing whatever it was about allspeak that made incantations impossible. Draco gripped the handle while Harry wrapped his fingers around Draco's and murmured, "Lumos." A second light flickered to life. "Better, thanks," Draco said. Two wands, two lights, proper adventuring. Ahead, they could hear sounds, dragging, scuffling, Weasley's muffled protests. At least he was alive. "Ready?" Harry asked. "Always." They moved into the darkness together. The tunnel was long, much longer than Draco expected. It twisted and turned, sloping gently upward, dirt walls giving way to rough stone in places. Roots poked through the ceiling, pale and gnarled. The air smelled of damp and old wood and something else underneath, something animal. "This has been here a while," Draco observed quietly. "Someone built this." "The question is who," Harry murmured back. "And why?" The sounds ahead were getting closer. Weasley had stopped protesting. Draco hoped that meant he'd passed out and not something worse. The tunnel curved sharply, and then light. pale, dusty light filtering through gaps in rotted wood. The tunnel ended at what looked like a trapdoor already pushed open. They could hear movement above. Creaking floorboards, a low, rumbling growl. Draco and Harry exchanged a look. Harry went first, pulling himself up through the opening. Draco followed a heartbeat later, emerging into a house. An old house, abandoned and decaying. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in long strips. Dust covered everything. The furniture was smashed, claw marks gouged deep into the wood, and the windows were boarded shut so thoroughly that only slivers of morning light crept through. In his sleeve, Yer had gone very still, sensing danger. Wrong smell, she hissed softly, fear and Nartrat. A floorboard creaked above them. Then another, something was pacing, growling, then voices, Weasley's high and panicked. The growling had stopped, replaced by something worsey voice, ragged and desperate, saying words Harry couldn't quite make out. Harry and Draco exchanged a glance. Draco's eyes were bright with excitement, but Harry felt something heavier settling in his chest. This wasn't a game. Weasley was up there with whatever that dog had become. They climbed the stairs as quietly as they could, testing each step, wands raised. The silence was worse than the growling had been. At the top of the stairs, a door stood ajar. Harry pushed it open. Weasley was on the floor, panting, his hand bleeding sluggishly. He looked up as Harry and Draco entered, his face white with terror, and standing over him a man. Gaunt, skeletal, his skin stretched tight over his bones. His hair was long and matted, his clothes hanging in tatters. But his eyes were sharp, aware, fixed on the small grey rat that Weasley was clutching protectively to his chest. Pater Odinson he's it was the dog. It turned into Sirius Black, the face from the newspapers. Harry would know it anywhere. Black's head turned toward them. For a moment, something like surprise flickered across his wasted face. Harry, his voice was hoarse, raw from disuse. Stay back. Harry's wand was trained on the man. What do you want with Weasley? I don't want the boy. Black took a step forward, and Harry tensed. I want the rat. Weasley clutched Scabbers tighter, his eyes darting between Harry and Black. He's completely mad. He kept saying Scabbers isn't a rat, that he's some wizard called Peter Pettigrew. Pettigrew. Draco's voice sharpened with interest. The one you killed. I didn't kill anyone. Black's laugh was bitter, broken. Peter did. Peter betrayed your parents to Voldemort, was the secret keeper, not me. When I tracked him down, he blew up the street, cut off his own finger, and transformed. He's an animagus been hiding as a rat while I rotted in Azkaban for his crimes. You never had a trial, Harry said slowly. Everyone looked at him. I know that much. You were sent to Azkaban without a trial. Something shifted in Black's face. You believe me? His voice cracked, desperate. I believe you never got a chance to defend yourself. Harry kept his wand steady. That doesn't mean I believe everything you're saying. You're telling me that rat is an animagus. Prove it. I don't have a wand. I can't force the transformation. Convenient, Draco murmured, but he was studying the rat with open curiosity. Still, an unregistered animagus hiding as a pet, it would explain a few things. Like what? Weasley demanded. Like why Black went to Gryffindor Tower instead of the Slytherin dungeons. Draco tilted his head. If Black wanted Harry dead, he would have gone where Harry actually sleeps, unless he wasn't after Harry at all. Ron's grip on Scabbers tightened. The rat was thrashing now, squeaking frantically. In Harry's sleeve, Yer stirred. Not rat, Yer hissed suddenly. Too big inside, too much fear, wrong shape. Yer says something's off about him, Harry said. She says he smells wrong. Too afraid and something about being the wrong shape. The wrong shape, Weasley stared at him. What does that even mean? Like he's not what he appears to be, Draco said quietly. And of course he's afraid. Weasley's voice rose, cracking. There's a murderer right there, and you've got that bloody snake, and Weasley, rats don't understand words, Draco cut in. They don't know what a murderer is. They don't understand conversations. So why is yours acting like it knows exactly what's happening? Because he's stressed, because I'm stressed. Weasley clutched Scabbers tighter. He's been my pet for years, all I've got left, and you're all standing there talking about killing him." "No one said anything about killing him," Harry said quietly. "We just want to know the truth. The truth is he's a rat." Weasley was scrambling backward across the dusty floor, scabbers pressed against his chest. "You've wanted to feed him to your snake since the train. This is just an excuse." "He's going to run," Black said urgently. "Don't let him," the rat bit Weasley. Weasley yelped, his grip loosening for just a second, and Scabbers tore free. The rat hit the floor running, bolting for a crack in the wall. Draco moved first blade in hand, spinning through the air, embedding itself in the floorboards directly in the rat's path. Scabbers skidded, turned, bolted the other direction. "Yeah, catch him," Harry shouted. "Don't let him escape." His familiar launched from his sleeve, white scales gleaming. She coiled around the rat in one fluid motion, her head poised inches from its face. The rat went limp, trembling violently, making a high-pitched sound that was almost like screaming. "That's not normal," Harry said quietly. "That's not how a rat sounds." Weasley was staring, cradling his bitten hand. "Scabbers." "What? Change back, Peter." Black's voice was shaking with rage, with hope, with the desperate fury of a decade. "I know it's you. I've always known. Just change back." And the rat thrashed wildly, squealing, but Yer held firm. "Tighter," Harry urged. "Hold him tight." Yer's coils constricted. And the rat screamed, not squeaked, screamed. A high, thin, horribly human sound, and then horribly it began to grow. Weasley hauled himself up against the wall with a cry of revulsion. Harry watched, frozen, as the rat expanded, twisted, changed. Fur receded into skin, limbs lengthened. A face emerged that was watery-eyed, pointed, trembling with fear. Where Scabbers had been, a man now lay on the floor, Yer still wrapped around his throat. Peter Pettigrew looked up at them with the desperate eyes of a cornered animal. "Sirius," he stammered. Old friend, you wouldn't." "Don't." Black's voice was ice. "Don't you dare call me friend." Weasley made a small, broken sound. Harry glanced over. The other boy had gone completely white, his whole body shaking. "The rat was a person," Weasley whispered. "The rat was a person." Pettigrew's eyes darted to Weasley, something desperate and calculating flickering across his face. Ron, dear boy, I was protecting you, all those years keeping watch over your family. Don't talk to me." Weasley's voice came out strangled. "You were a person." Pettigrew flinched, then his gaze landed on Harry. Something shifted in his expression, fawning, desperate hope. Harry, Potter, you have your mother's eyes. Did you know that?" "Lily was so kind. She would never have wanted me hurt. You're the one who told Voldemort where to find her." Harry's voice came out flat, cold. "You're the reason she's dead." Pettigrew flinched at the name. "You don't understand. The Dark Lord would have killed me." "I was afraid. I was only trying to survive. You were a coward." Black stepped forward, and Pettigrew turned his face away, whimpering. "You were always a coward, Peter. And now everyone is going to know it. Please, Sirius James would have understood. James would have shown mercy. Don't you dare speak his name." Sirius's voice shook with barely contained rage. "Don't you ever speak his name. You'll confess." Harry cut in before Sirius could do something they'd all regret. "You'll tell the truth about what you did, under Veritaserum, in front of witnesses. That's what's going to happen." Sirius looked at him. "Harry, if you kill him, you're still a murderer in everyone's eyes." Harry met his godfather's gaze steadily. "But if he confesses, then you're free, really free." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Sirius let out a shuddering breath, and something in his posture changed. The killing rage was still there, but banked now, controlled. "You're right," he whispered. "You're right, James would have. He would have wanted the truth." From the doorway came the sharp click of heels on wood. Professor Roosevelt stepped into the room, wand drawn, her eyes sweeping across the scene with quick assessment. Harry felt a wave of relief so intense his knees nearly buckled. Beside him, Draco's shoulders dropped, tension bleeding out of his frame. Roosevelt's gaze found them first. "Are you hurt, either of you?" "We're fine," Harry said. But Weasley's hand, Roosevelt was already moving toward Weasley, who flinched back instinctively. "Let me see." Her voice was firm but not unkind. She took Weasley's bitten hand, examined it briefly, and murmured something that made the bleeding stop. "You'll need proper treatment, but that will hold." Sirius had gone very still, staring at Roosevelt with an expression Harry couldn't read. "You're the new defense professor. I saw you in the castle. Professor Adelaide Roosevelt." She met his gaze evenly. "And you are Sirius Black. We have much to discuss, but first things first." Pettigrew's eyes had gone wide with desperate hope. Professor, please. These children attacked me and that snake tried to kill me. I'm an innocent man. Peter Pettigrew." Roosevelt's voice was cool, cutting through his babbling. "I wondered when you would turn up." Pettigrew's face went slack with shock. Then, before anyone could react, Hetwis did. His body compressed, shrinking, fur sprouting across his skin. He was transforming, trying to become a rat again, to slip through Year's coils and escape. Roosevelt moved. Her wand carved through the air incarcerus, and ropes erupted around the half-transformed creature. In the same breath, her free hand snapped, a pulse of green-gold light forcing the transformation to reverse. Pettigrew materialized fully human on the floor, gasping, retching, bound hand and foot. He strained against the ropes, tried again to transform, but nothing happened. "I think not." Roosevelt's voice was soft, dangerous. "You'll find that particular trick no longer works, Mr. Pettigrew." She moved toward Yer, extending her hand palm up. "You can release him now." Yer's coils tightened slightly. "No, he is bad. He will run." "It's okay," Harry told her. "Professor Roosevelt has him. You did well." Yer's tongue flickered, tasting the air. Then she uncoiled from Pettigrew's throat and slithered up Roosevelt's arm, allowing herself to be transferred back to Harry. Harry felt her settle against his skin, still tense with alertness. "You're a Parselmouth," Sirius said, almost absently. James would have found that hilarious. Harry didn't know what to say to that. Black turned his attention to Roosevelt, watching her with wary fascination. "How did you know?" "About Peter. My associates have been investigating your case for some time, Mr. Black." Roosevelt's eyes never left Pettigrew. "No trial, no testimony, no evidence presented, a lot of unanswered questions." "Please," Pettigrew gasped from the floor. "Please, I was afraid." "The Dark Lord, 10 years." Roosevelt's voice didn't rise, but it cut like a blade. "For 10 years, an innocent man was tormented in Azkaban because of your cowardice, and this boy's godfather was denied to him, while you hid as a child's pet." Pettigrew was weeping now, snot running down his face. "You're fortunate Mr. Potter wants you alive for testimony." Roosevelt's gaze flickered to Harry, then back to the cowering man. "Otherwise, I might be tempted to let Mr. Black have you." She turned to survey the room. Weasley was still pale and shaking. "Mr. Weasley," her voice gentled. "How are you holding up?" Weasley blinked, surprised to be addressed. I don't." "That's all right. You don't have to have words for it yet." She moved toward him, checked his hand again. "Can you walk? We need to get you back to the castle." "All of you," Weasley nodded shakily. "You did well," Roosevelt said quietly, so only Harry and Draco could hear. "Both of you." "We couldn't just leave him," Harry said. "No, you couldn't." Something warm flickered behind her cool expression. She turned back to Sirius. "Mr. Black, you will need to come with me as well. There will be questions, testimony to arrange, formal proceedings." "I understand." Sirius's voice was hoarse. "I'll do whatever's necessary, as long as," he looked at Harry, "as long as I can see him. After, that can be arranged." "Harry," Sirius's voice cracked, "your father would be proud, so proud. I'm so sorry I wasn't there, that I couldn't." "You're here now," Harry said quietly. "That's what matters." For a moment, godfather and godson just looked at each other. So many long years of separation, a lifetime of what should have been. "Right," Roosevelt said briskly, breaking the moment with merciful efficiency. "Let's get everyone back to the castle. Mr. Pettigrew has an appointment with Veritaserum. Mr. Black has a great deal of testimony to give, and I," she sighed, "have a great deal of paperwork to file." "Thank you," Sirius said quietly, "for believing, for investigating. Don't thank me yet." Roosevelt hauled Pettigrew to his feet, keeping a firm grip on his bound arm. Thank me when you're officially exonerated, which, if I have anything to say about it, will be very soon. Sirius let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Harry and Draco fell into step beside Sirius as they made their way back through the tunnel. Weasley trailed behind, silent, still processing. The sun was just rising as they emerged from beneath the whooping willow, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Harry looked up at the light and thought about godparents and traitors and the way the truth could change everything. Ahead, he could see Hermione running toward them from the castle, her hair flying, her face anxious. Sirius wasn't free yet. There would be hearings and testimony and the slow grinding wheels of wizarding justice to navigate. But for the first time in years, he had a chance. And in Roosevelt's iron grip, Peter Pettigrew stumbled along in his barns, knowing that his 10 years of hiding were finally, irrevocably over. Chapter 23. Sirius Black sat in Albus Dumbledore's office and tried to remember how to breathe. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Any moment now, he would wake up in his cell, the cold stone pressing against his back, the Dementor's chill seeping into his bones. This warmth, the fire crackling in the grate, the soft blanket someone had wrapped around his shoulders, the cup of tea growing cold in his trembling hands, it was all a dream. A cruel trick his fractured mind was playing on him. But the tea smelled like chamomile, and the fire popped and hissed. And somewhere in the castle, Peter Pettigrew was being held under guard, waiting to confess his crimes. Sirius took a shaky breath, then another. The room kept slipping in and out of focus, the whirring silver instruments on their spindly tables. The portraits of former headmasters pretending to sleep, Fox on his perch, watching with ancient, knowing eyes. It was all too bright, too warm, too much after years of grey stone and endless cold. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, watching him with those piercing blue eyes. The old wizard looked older, more tired than Sirius remembered. The war had aged them all, but the years had carved deep lines into Dumbledore's face that hadn't been there before. Sirius. Dumbledore's voice was gentle, careful. How are you feeling? A laugh scraped out of Sirius's throat, raw and bitter. How am I feeling? I've spent 10 years in Azkaban for a crime I didn't commit, while the real traitor lived as a child's pet right under your nose. How do you think I'm feeling? Dumbledore flinched. It was small, barely perceptible, but Sirius saw it. Good. I owe you an apology, Dumbledore said quietly. Sirius went still. I should have pushed for a trial. I should have questioned the narrative. The old wizard's hands were folded on his desk, but his knuckles were white. I was so consumed with protecting Harry, with managing the aftermath of that terrible night, that I failed you. I believed the evidence as it was presented. I should have looked deeper. The words hung in the air between them. 10 years. A decade of darkness and cold and despair, of Dementors feeding on every happy memory, until there was nothing left but guilt and rage and the endless, gnawing knowledge that Peter was out there, free, while Sirius rotted. You believed I was guilty, Sirius said. His voice came out flat. Dead. I did. Dumbledore met his eyes, and there was genuine pain there. I believed you had betrayed James and Lily. I believed you had murdered Peter and those muggles. And I was wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. Sirius wanted to scream at him. Wanted to overturn the desk, shatter the delicate silver instruments, rage at the man who had let him suffer for over a decade. But he was so tired, so hollowed out. The anger was there, burning in his chest, but he couldn't seem to make it move. It doesn't fix anything, Sirius said finally. Saying sorry, it doesn't give me back all those lost years. No, Dumbledore's voice was heavy. It doesn't, nothing can. But I am sorry, Sirius, truly. Sirius looked away toward the fire. The flames danced and flickered, casting shadows across the stone walls. He didn't know what to do with an apology. Didn't know how to hold it, or whether to accept it, or if acceptance was even possible. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. The door swung open, and a tall man stepped into the office. Sirius's first impression was of sharp elegance, angular features, dark hair swept back from a high forehead, eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The man was dressed in clothing that looked both ancient and timeless, leather and dark fabric with hints of green and gold. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who had never known physical uncertainty. Foreign, serious thought, his addled mind grasping for something solid. The clothing, the bearing, the way he carried himself, this wasn't a British wizard. There was something almost regal about him. Something that didn't quite fit. Professor Dumbledore. The man inclined his head, slightly polite, but not deferential, as if he were greeting an equal rather than one of the most powerful wizards in Britain. Then he turned his attention to Sirius. "Mr. Black. I am Loki Odinson." His voice had no trace of accent, but somehow that made it stranger. Too perfect, too smooth. Odinson. The name clicked into place slowly, Sirius's Azkaban-addled mind struggling to make connections. Odinson. You're Draco's father. I am. Sirius stared at him, something tugging at his memory. White blonde hair, grey eyes, a face that reminded him of Draco. He has Narcissa's eyes. The realization hit him like a blow. Narcissassin, he's my cousin's boy. You knew his mother, Loki said. It wasn't a question. She was my cousin. We were close before the war, before Sirius ran away from home, before everything fell apart. I didn't know she had a child. I didn't know she stopped, unable to finish. His thoughts kept fragmenting, scattering like startled birds. She died the day Draco was born, Loki said. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. There is much to catch up on. Loki took a seat in the chair beside Sirius, not asking permission. Sirius noticed, just settling in as if he had every right to be there. Dumbledore's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sirius caught something in the old wizard's posture. A slight tension. How did? I mean, if Narcissa... Sirius couldn't quite form the question. His thoughts were still sluggish, still fighting through 10 years of fog. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to focus. Take your time, Loki said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. There's no rush. Sirius lowered his hands, drew a breath. How did you come to have Draco if Narcissa died? Surely Lucius. Loki's expression darkened. Lucius Malfoy performed a blood ritual, or so I suspect. He believed he could siphon the ancient magic of my family line and bind it to his heir, make the Malfoy name more powerful. Sirius felt his blood run cold. That's dark magic, the kind that requires a sacrifice. Yes, Loki's voice was flat. I believe Narcissa was that sacrifice. Whether she knew what Lucius intended, I cannot say. But the ritual killed her, and it worked, after a fashion. Draco is Lucius's child by blood, but he is the child of my magic. My son in truth as well as in name. Horror and grief crashed through Sirius in equal measure. Lucius killed her, for power. I suspect so. There's no proof, nothing that would hold in court, but losing his heir, losing the power he thought he'd gained. It broke something in him. He hasn't been seen publicly in years, holed up in Malfoy Manor, from what I understand. Loki examined his fingernails, almost idly. I'm told he's become quite reclusive, fearful, even. One can only imagine what he's waiting for. Sirius looked at this foreign wizard. A man who spoke of patience and fear with such casual certainty, and felt something shift in his understanding. Loki Odinson wasn't just wealthy, wasn't just connected. He was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that didn't need to make threats because the threat was simply understood. Lucius Malfoy, one of the most arrogant purebloods Sirius had ever known, was hiding in his own manor, afraid. And Loki Odinson sat here discussing it as though remarking on the weather. Good, Sirius thought, with a viciousness that surprised him. Let him rot in fear. Let him spend every day wondering when the axe will fall. But the satisfaction curdled quickly, poisoned by what lay beneath it. Because none of this, not Lucius's fear, not his isolation, not whatever fate Loki had planned for him, none of it would bring Narcissa back. A long silence filled the office. Sirius felt tears prickling at his eyes, the first tears he'd been able to shed in years. The Dementors had taken even that from him. "Sissy," he whispered. "Poor Sissy." He shook his head, the grief raw and fresh even for a death that had happened over a decade ago. "She was the best of us, you know, the Black Cousins. Bella was mad even before Azkaban. Andromeda ran and never looked back. But Narcissa, she just wanted to love someone, to be loved." "And Hugh said her. She loved Draco," Loki said quietly. "She must have known that she wouldn't survive the birth, but she carried him anyway, protected him with everything she had, right until the last moment." Sirius closed his eyes. He could picture it too clearly. Narcissa, always the gentle one, the peacemaker, choosing to die so her son could live, knowing what Lucius had done, knowing what was coming, and loving her child enough to see it through anyway. "That sounds like her," he whispered. "She always did lead with her heart. Draco doesn't remember her, of course. He was only hours old when she passed, but I've told him what I know, what I've pieced together." Loki paused. "He knows she loved him, that she chose him, even knowing the cost." Sirius's throat tightened. "And you took him in, when?" "When he was 6. Something shifted in Loki's expression, cold and sharp there and gone. Lucius had kept him until then, raised him if you can call it that, but Lucius was not a patient man. And Draco was not the heir he had envisioned. The way Loki said it made Sirius's blood run cold. What did he do? He used an unforgivable on a 6-year-old child. Loki's voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that spoke of rage long since banked into something more dangerous than fire. "I intervened. Draco has been mine ever since." "Hi's me own," Loki continued, and there was something fierce beneath the quiet words. "The magic made it so." Sirius drew a sharp breath, a child of his magic. He was a black and he'd grown up surrounded by old magic, dark magic, the kind of blood rites and binding rituals that respectable wizards pretended didn't exist. He knew what those words meant. Not adoption, not guardianship, something deeper. The ritual Lucius had performed, trying to steal power from the Odinson bloodline, it had worked, in a way. But magic had its own ideas about ownership, about belonging. Draco wasn't just raised by Loki. He was Loki's, claimed by magic itself, bound in ways that went beyond paperwork or even blood. "The ritual backfired on Lucius," Sirius said slowly, working it through. "He tried to bind your magic to his heir, but magic doesn't like to be stolen. It chose you instead." Loki met his eyes steadily. "Clever, yes. Draco carries my magic in his veins. He is my son in every way that matters. In several ways that most wizards would find difficult to comprehend." Sirius let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Serves Lucius right, trying to steal from an ancient bloodline and losing his heir entirely." The dark satisfaction faded quickly, replaced by something heavier. "But Draco. 6 years with that monster before you got him out." "6 years too long," Loki agreed. Something shifted in his expression, cold and sharp, there and gone. "Lucius is fortunate that I value Draco's peace of mind more than I value revenge. For now." Sirius stared at him. There was something in Loki's stillness, in the precise control of his expression, that suggested Lucius Malfoy was living on borrowed time, and that the debt would be collected when Loki deemed the moment right. Sirius found he had nothing to say to that. If someone had used an unforgivable on Harry, Sirius wouldn't have waited, wouldn't have shown any restraint at all. Maybe this foreign wizard was more patient than him, or maybe he was simply playing a longer game. Either way, Sirius realized it didn't matter. What mattered was the outcome. Narcissa was gone, another person he'd failed to protect, another loss in an endless string of losses. But her son was alive, loved, safe, claimed by someone who would burn the world down for him if it came to that, but who held himself in check for Draco's sake. That was more than Sirius had managed for anyone he'd loved. Something in his chest loosened, just slightly. He glanced at Dumbledore, still sitting silently behind his desk. The old wizard was watching the exchange with an expression Sirius couldn't quite read. Thoughtful, perhaps, or wary. Dumbledore, who usually had something to say about everything, was letting this foreign wizard take the lead in his own office. That said something. Sirius wasn't sure what. "And Harry," Sirius said, his voice rough as he turned back to Loki. "How did you come to take him in?" A hint of warmth entered Loki's expression, the first real softening Sirius had seen. "We met him in Diagon Alley, actually, shopping for first-year supplies. Draco was being fitted for robes and started chatting with the boy on the next stool." A slight smile. "By the time I came to collect Draco, they were already debating the merits of steak versus chicken." Despite everything, Sirius huffed a laugh. "That sounds like James's son." Harry's caretaker, a man called Hagrid, had taken ill from the Gringotts carts and gone to recover at the Leaky Cauldron. He'd left Harry alone, so Draco invited him to shop with us. By the end of the day, the boys were inseparable. Loki paused. Harry had no idea who he was or what he meant to the wizarding world. He didn't know, Sirius leaned forward. About any of it, he knew nothing. The Dursleys had told him his parents died in a car crash. He didn't know he was famous, didn't know about Voldemort, didn't even know magic existed until Hagrid arrived to deliver his Hogwarts letter. Sirius's hands clenched into fists. Lily's sister. Petunia. He shot a look at Dumbledore, not accusing so much as bewildered, disbelieving. "You left Lily's son with her magic-hating sister. Why?" Petunia despised everything about our world. She barely spoke to Lily after she got her Hogwarts letter. "Why would Yowever think that was a good idea?" "The Blood Wards," Dumbledore began. "I don't care about Blood Wards." Sirius's voice was hoarse but gaining strength. Petunia, I know how she felt about magic, about Lily. You left James and Lily's son with people who hate what he was." Dumbledore's face was carefully composed, but something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or resignation. "I believed it was the safest option. I did not fully appreciate the nature of the home environment. Didn't appreciate." Sirius's laugh was bitter. "Did anyone even check on him? In 10 years?" The silence was damning. Loki spoke into the void. "When I learned what his home life was like, the neglect, the cruelty, I couldn't leave him there. Harry is part of our family now, legally, magically, and in every way that matters. I hold guardianship of him." Sirius felt something twist in his chest. Gratitude and grief and a strange, sharp jealousy that he immediately felt ashamed of. This man had done what Sirius should have done, had been there when Sirius couldn't be. "Thank you," Sirius managed, his voice cracking, "for saving him, for loving him when I couldn't. He's easy to love." "You'll see that for yourself." Loki's voice was gentle. "I'm thankful every day to have him in my life, in Draco's life. They're good for each other, shield brothers, Draco calls them, closer than friends, closer than most blood, shield brothers." The term was old, ancient even. Sirius tucked it away, another piece of the puzzle that was Loki Odinson. "Professor Roosevelt said someone was investigating my case," Sirius said after a moment, grasping for solid ground. "That was you. My law speakers have been looking into the irregularities for some time. No trial. No evidence presented. It never sat right." Law speakers, another unfamiliar term. Sirius's eyes narrowed slightly. "Where exactly are you from, Mr. Odinson? You're not British." "No." Loki's smile was enigmatic. "I'm not. My family has extensive roots. But I've made my home here for Draco's sake. This is where he belongs." It wasn't really an answer, but Sirius was too exhausted to push. And frankly, he didn't care where Loki was from. He cared that anyone had stepped in to save Harry when the rest of the wizarding world had failed him. "But why?" Sirius shook his head, bewildered. "Why go to all this trouble? You didn't know me." Loki regarded him with an expression that was almost kind. "Harry is under my protection. You are his godfather. That makes your situation my concern." Such simple logic, such straightforward loyalty. Sirius had almost forgotten that people could be like that, could care about someone simply because they were connected to someone they loved. "My lawyers are already filing motions," Loki continued. "Pettigrew's testimony under Veritaserum will be entered into evidence. You will be exonerated." Exonerated. The word felt foreign, impossible. Sirius's hands were shaking again. But freedom is only the first step, Loki said. 10 years in Azkaban. You will need time, healers, a place to recover. I don't have anywhere, Sirius started. You do now, Loki cut him off. There is a cottage on my estate. Quiet, protected, staff who can help with your recovery. You can stay as long as you need. Sirius stared at him. Why would you do all this? Because Harry needs family. Real family who will love him and want to be part of his life. Loki held his gaze. And because you are Draco's blood Narcissa's cousin. That matters, family. The word echoed in Sirius's hollow chest. He'd thought he had no family left. The Blacks were dead or mad or imprisoned. James and Lily were gone. Even Remus had believed him guilty. But here was this stranger, this foreign wizard with his ancient words and his quiet power offering him a home, a chance, a way back. I hold legal guardianship of Harry now, Loki said, and his voice was careful, deliberate. But I want you to know that's not how I want it to stay. You're his godfather. James and Lily chose you. When you're ready, when you've healed, I want you to take that role, properly. Sirius's breath caught. You'd give that up. It was never mine to keep. I've been holding it in trust. Loki's eyes were steady. Harry deserves to have his godfather in his life, not as a visitor, not as a family friend, as his guardian if that's what you both want. The tears were falling freely now, and Sirius didn't bother to wipe them away. He didn't have words. Didn't know how to respond to this kind of generosity from a man who owed him nothing. I want to, Sirius managed, his voice cracking. I want to be there for him. I don't know if I'm. You will heal. It will take time, and it won't be easy, but you will heal. Loki's voice was firm. Certain, and in the meantime you will have support. You won't be alone in this. That is what family does. Sirius looked at Dumbledore, who had been silent throughout the exchange. The old wizard's face was unreadable relief, perhaps, or guilt, or something more complicated. He had failed Sirius. Failed Harry, but someone else had stepped in to fill the gap. Dumbledore caught his gaze and inclined his head slightly. An acknowledgement, a concession. Whatever power he'd once held over Harry's fate, he was ceding it now. Sirius turned back to Loki and nodded slowly. He didn't trust his voice, but he didn't need to speak. For the first time in a decade, Sirius Black allowed himself to hope. Chapter 24. The few days following the Shrieking Shack had been suffocating. Whispers followed them through the corridors. Stairs tracked them across the great hall. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, the real story, not the sanitized version that had trickled down through official channels. Pettigrew had been captured. Sirius Black was innocent. Beyond that, details were scarce, and Hogwarts filled the void with speculation. Draco weathered it with the practiced ease of someone raised in Asgard's courts, where gossip was an art form and rumor could topple alliances. Harry, less accustomed to being the center of attention, despite his fame, he'd managed to fly under the radar for most of the year, handled it by staying close to Draco and saying as little as possible. Blaze simply existed in their orbit, offering dry observations and deflecting questions with such elegant non-answers that people often walked away thinking they'd learned something when they hadn't. It had been, all things considered, an exhausting few days, but tonight felt different. Draco noticed it the moment they entered the great hall for dinner. The usual buzz of conversation was there, but the edge of frenetic curiosity had softened. People still glanced their way, but it was less pointed, more expectant. Something's happening, Harry murmured as they took their seats at the Slytherin table. Obviously. Draco scanned the high table. Professor Roosevelt, his father, wearing that familiar glamour, sat in her usual spot, expression composed and unreadable. Dumbledore's chair was empty. Blaze slid onto the bench across from them, not looking up from the apple he was polishing on his sleeve. Dumbledore's not at the high table. 10 Galleons says he's planning a dramatic entrance. That's not a bet anyone would take, Draco replied. The man does love theatrics. As if on cue, the doors to the great hall swung open. Dumbledore strode in, his robes a particularly vibrant shade of purple tonight, silver moons and stars glittering in the candlelight. He walked the length of the hall with measured steps, and by the time he reached the high table, conversation had died to a hush. He didn't sit. Instead, he turned to face the students, and Draco felt the shift in the room, that collective intake of breath that preceded an announcement. "Good evening," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying without any apparent effort. "I trust you are all looking forward to your dinners. I will not keep you long from them." A few nervous laughs scattered through the hall. "Recent events," Dumbledore continued, and the laughter died, "have weighed heavily on our community. Truths long buried have come to light. Justice delayed has, at last, begun its course." He paused, letting the words settle. "In times such as these, it is important to recognize those who have demonstrated extraordinary character. Those who, when faced with danger and uncertainty, chose to act with integrity." Draco felt Harry tense beside him. Under the table, Draco pressed his knee against Harry's, a silent reassurance. "To Miss Hermione Granger," Dumbledore announced, "for quick thinking in defense of her friends, 25 points to Gryffindor." Applause erupted from the Gryffindor table. Draco glanced over and saw Hermione's cheeks flush pink, her housemates patting her on the back. She caught his eye across the hall and gave a small, pleased nod. "To Mr. Draco Odinson," Dumbledore continued, and Draco's attention snapped back to the front. "For resourcefulness and determination in pursuit of the truth, 25 points to Slytherin." The Slytherin table erupted. Draco inclined his head in acknowledgement, keeping his expression appropriately modest, even as satisfaction warmed his chest. 25 points was respectable, and resourcefulness that was a Slytherin virtue. Dumbledore had chosen his words carefully. His father would be pleased. Or at least not displeased, which was sometimes the best one could hope for after what Draco privately admitted had been a somewhat reckless adventure. Though really, it had turned out rather well. No broken bones this time, unlike the troll incident at Halloween, where he'd fractured his arm showing off. Hermione had come to find them the moment she'd realized something was wrong, which meant proper backup. And most importantly, they'd done the right thing. Pettigrew was captured. Sirius Black was being exonerated. Harry had a godfather now. All in all, a successful quest by any Asgardian standard. To Mr. Harry Potter, Dumbledore said, and the hall fell quiet again. For choosing justice over vengeance, and for wisdom beyond his years, 25 points to Slytherin. More applause, though this time it came from across the hall, not just Slytherin, but Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw as well. Even some of the Gryffindors joined in, though with less enthusiasm. Harry ducked his head, uncomfortable with the attention as always. Draco resisted the urge to elbow him, and to Mr. Ronald Weasley, Dumbledore concluded, for facing a terrible truth with more grace than many adults, could manage 10 points to Gryffindor. The applause that followed was more subdued, but genuine. Draco glanced toward the Gryffindor table and saw Weasley sitting up straighter, ears red but expression cautiously pleased. 10 points. For what, exactly? Being present while his pet rat was revealed to be a murderer. Blaise voiced Draco's thoughts before he could. "Fascinating," he murmured, quiet enough that only their table could hear. "Remind me again what Weasley actually did during all this," Draco snorted. Harry elbowed Blaise but didn't actually disagree. "He was there," Harry said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced that merited points either. "Ah yes, proximity, the most valued of virtues." Draco let Blaise's dry commentary wash over him, the familiar rhythm of it settling something in his chest. This was good. This was normal. After days of tension and whispers, and the weight of too many secrets, sitting here with Harry and Blaise, listening to them snipe at each other over something inconsequential, it felt like coming up for air. Dumbledore had returned to his seat, and with a wave of his hand, the feast appeared on the tables. The hall filled with the clatter of serving spoons and the buzz of renewed conversation. the earlier solemnity giving way to the comfortable noise of students who had been given permission to relax. Blaze had finally stopped polishing his apple and was cutting it into precise slices, arranging them on his plate in a pattern that probably meant something only to him. Across the hall, Hermione had left the celebrating Gryffindors and was making her way toward the Slytherin table, her usual habit now, starting dinner with her house and then drifting over to join them. And Harry was eating. Actually eating, with something approaching appetite for the first time in days. Draco allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They'd survived. More than survived, they'd won. Pettigrew was in custody, Sirius Black was being cleared, and Harry would finally have the family he deserved. There would be more challenges ahead, certainly. There always were. But for now, in this moment, they could simply exist. The food was good. The company was better. And somewhere at the high table, his father was watching over them all, even if no one else knew it. Ron had hoped the common room would be empty. It wasn't. The Point's announcement at dinner had changed something. For days, Ron had been able to slip through the castle like a ghost, invisible, unremarkable, just another Weasley who'd finally learned to keep his mouth shut. The whispers had all been about Potter and Odinson and what had really happened with Sirius Black. No one had paid attention to Ron, but Dumbledore had said his name, in front of everyone, for facing a terrible truth with more grace than many adults could manage, and now people were looking at him. Thinking he could see it happening in real time as he stepped through the portrait hole, Seamus Finnegan's eyes went wide. Lavender Brown whispered something to Parvati Patil. Dean Thomas set down his exploding snap cards and stared. Ron knew what they were piecing together. The Daily Prophet had reported that Peter Pettigrew was a rat animagus. Everyone knew Ron used to have a rat. Everyone had noticed, over the past few days, that Ron didn't have his rat anymore. It wasn't hard to figure out. Bloody hell, Seamus breathed. It was Scabbers, wasn't it? Ron's stomach flipped. He'd known this moment would come eventually, had been half dreading it since Saturday, since the Shrieking Shack, since he'd watched his pet twist and grow and become a man with watery eyes and a pointed face. He could deny it. Could brush past them and go up to the dormitory and hide behind his bed curtains. But people were actually looking at him, seeing him, for the first time in months. Yeah, Ron said. It was Scabbers. The common room erupted. No way, are you serious? Your rat. He was Percy's rat before mine, Ron found himself saying as people crowded closer. We had him for years. 10 years, actually. Which I guess makes sense now, since normal rats don't live that long, but we just thought he was. Wait. Seamus held up a hand. 10 years. That bloke was living as your pet rat 14 years. Yeah. Ron felt the knot in his chest loosening as he talked. He was missing a toe, and we thought it was because he'd gotten in a fight with another rat or something, but actually it's because he cut off his own finger when he faked his death. That's disgusting, Lavender said, but she leaned in closer. What happened? Dean asked. The prophet just said Pettigrew was captured, but it didn't say how. Were you there? Is that why Dumbledore gave you points? Ron hesitated. Part of him wanted to embellish, make himself sound braver, more heroic. He could say he'd figured it out, that he'd helped capture Pettigrew, that he'd fought alongside Potter and Odinson. But that wasn't what happened, and for once, the truth was interesting enough on its own. Scabbers got out, Ron said. He'd been mental all year, trying to escape, and he finally got loose, and I was chasing after him, and then this massive black dog just grabbed me, dragged me through a tunnel under the Whomping Willow. I didn't know what was happening. Thought I was going to die, honestly. Sirius Black can turn into a dog. Seamus's voice went up an octave. Yeah, he's an animagus too. Wicked, Dean breathed. So he dragged you through a tunnel, Lavender prompted. Then what? Then I was in the Shrieking Shack. And Black was there, and he looked completely mental, and he kept saying he wanted to kill someone, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Scabbers. Ron could feel the memory taking shape as he spoke, could almost see the dusty room and the moonlight through the broken windows. And then Potter and Odinson showed up. They followed you. They saw the dog drag me under the whooping willow and just followed into a secret tunnel after a giant black dog. Ron shook his head. Say what you want about Slytherins, but that's pretty mental. Not bad, I guess. A few people laughed. So what happened? Dean pressed. How'd they catch Pettigrew? Ron thought about the knife Odinson had thrown when Scabbers tried to bolt quick and precise, blocking off his escape. It had been impressive, actually. Scary impressive. But something held Ron back from sharing that detail. Maybe it was remembering what he'd said on the train before the start of term, about Odinson's mum. He pushed the thought away. Potter's snake, the one he keeps in his sleeve. Potter hissed something at it in parcel tongue, and it just shot out and grabbed Scabbers before he could run. Wouldn't let go no matter how much he struggled. That's actually pretty useful, Dean said. The parcel tongue thing, never thought about it like that. Yeah, Ron shrugged. It's actually pretty cool, I guess, when it's being used to catch murderers. And then, Ron continued, the snake had held on while Scabbers twisted and thrashed, and then he'd just started changing. The common room was utterly silent. It was horrible, Ron said quietly, watching him grow. Hearing him scream, and then there was just this man where my rat used to be, and he was crying and begging and making excuses about why he'd betrayed the Potters. Yao saw him confess. Yeah, basically, Merlin's pants, Seamus said. That's mental. That's absolutely mental. And then Professor Roosevelt showed up, Ron added, and he could feel himself getting animated now, the excitement of it overtaking the weirdness. She just walked in like she knew exactly what was happening, and she had Pettigrew bound and gagged in about 2 seconds flat. It wassicked. She didn't even look worried, just handled it like it was nothing. Dean leaned forward. Our defense professor was there too. Yeah. She's been investigating Black's case or something. She said she knew Pettigrew was still alive. Ron was gesturing now, caught up in the memory. You should have seen her. Pettigrew was blubbering and trying to make excuses, and she just looked at him, and he shut right up. And then she marched him back to the castle like he weighed nothing. That's brilliant, Seamus breathed. I always knew there was something cool about her. Yeah, she's terrifying, Ron said, with clear admiration. You got dragged through a secret tunnel by an escaped convict who turned out to be innocent, Dean said slowly, watched your pet rat turn into the actual murderer, and then saw your defense professor take him down. Pretty much, yeah. Ron. Dean clapped him on the shoulder. That's the maddest thing I've ever heard. And just like that, people were talking over each other, asking questions, demanding details, treating Ron like he was actually interesting for once. When had Black shown up at Hogwarts? How big was the snake? What did Pettigrew look like? Was it true Professor Roosevelt had been there too? Ron answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't, and felt something warm spreading through his chest that he barely recognized. People wanted to hear from him. People were seeing him again. He'd almost forgotten what that felt like. Eventually, the crowd thinned, people drifting off to finish homework or head to bed. Ron found himself on one of the sofas near the fire, pleasantly exhausted from talking more in one evening than he had in weeks. The cushions dipped on either side of him. Not bad, Ronnikins, Fred said, stretching his legs toward the fire. You tell a decent story when you're not making things up, George added. Ron snorted. Thanks for the vote of confidence. For a moment, they just sat there. The fire crackled. Somewhere across the room, a group of fourth years argued about Quidditch statistics. We should have noticed, George said, quieter now, that you were having a rough go before all this. Ron blinked. What? You've been miserable for months, Fred said. Eating alone, sneaking around, avoiding everyone. We thought you were just being dramatic. Figured you'd sort yourself out, George added. Should have checked in. Ron didn't know what to say. An apology from the twins was rare enough to be alarming. I was being a prat, Ron said. The stuff I said on the train. I made things worse. Yeah, Mum's letter was pretty clear about that, Fred said. Something about a formal apology you're supposed to give, Ron groaned. 3 pages of his mother's furious handwriting outlining exactly what he was going to do to make things right. He hadn't figured out how to start yet. That's on you to sort, George said. The stuff with Potter and Odinson, but this, he gestured vaguely. The rat thing, that's not your fault. I know. And Ron did know that, logically. He hadn't known Scabbers was a person. No one had. But there was something else sitting weird in his chest. When everyone stopped talking to me, Ron said slowly, Scabbers was. I dunno. He was just there, you know. I'd talk to him sometimes. The twins were quiet. And it turns out he was a murderer the whole time. Ron picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. So that's... yeah. He didn't really have words for it. It wasn't like Scabbers had been fake. He'd still been there, still slept on Ron's pillow, still let Ron complain about things. But knowing who he actually was made all of it feel different, wrong. That's rough, Fred said, and for once there was no joke underneath it. Whatever, Ron shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with how much he'd said. It's fine, just weird. Percy passed by on his way to the dormitory stairs. He paused, and Ron tensed, expecting a lecture. Instead, Percy just gave him a small nod. Ron remembered Saturday night in the hospital wing. McGonagall had brought Percy in after getting the full story, and Percy had sat beside Ron's bed for almost an hour without saying anything. Just being there, Ron nodded back. Right, Fred announced, standing up. Enough of this. Lee's got dung bombs that need testing. I don't think I should, wasn't asking. George hauled Ron up by the arm. You've been moping for weeks. Tonight you're helping us traumatize Filch. That seems like a bad idea right after getting points from Dumbledore. Best time, actually. No one will suspect you. Ron let himself be dragged toward the portrait hole. He still had to figure out how to apologize to Potter and Odinson. His mum's letter made that pretty clear, but his brothers were here. Gryffindor was talking to him again. That was something. The weeks after Pettigrew's capture settled into something almost ordinary. Draco found himself savoring it. No escaped convicts. No secret tunnels. No rats that were secretly murderers. No trolls. For that matter, he still remembered the chaos of Halloween, the fear and confusion of that first major crisis. And somewhere along the way, he'd finally figured out charms. The wand movements that had felt so awkward at the start of the year now came naturally, his magic responding with precision instead of unpredictable bursts. All the uncertainty and struggle from the beginning of the year had settled into a rhythm. He knew where he stood now in this world of wands and incantations. He knew who his friends were. He knew what he was capable of. It felt good, not perfect, of course. Nothing ever was. Hermione's presence at the Slytherin table still drew looks. It always did. A Gryffindor at their table was unusual enough. A Muggle-born Gryffindor was, to some, unforgivable. Draco could feel the disapproval radiating from certain corners of the table. The sidelong glances, the tightened jaws. The way some of the older students made a point of sitting as far away as possible. But no one said anything. No one dared say anything. That word, the one that made Harry's eyes go flat and cold, the one that made Draco's hand drift toward the knife he kept in his sleeve, had not been spoken in their presence in weeks. Winfrith Selwyn had said it. 7th year, Sacred 28, with a sneer that suggested he'd been using the slur since birth. He'd cornered them in the corridor outside the library, with the Slytherin beaters flanking him, Lucian Bowl and Peregrine Derrick. 4th years built like small mountains, their bulk filling the corridor. Hermione had been walking with Draco and Harry, talking about an essay, and Selwyn had stepped into their path and spoken the word like it was supposed to mean something, like it was supposed to make her smaller. It didn't. Hermione's wand was in her hand before Draco could react, her chin lifted in defiance. Say that again, she said, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. I want to make sure I heard you correctly before I report you to a professor, Selwyn laughed. It was an ugly, dismissive sound. Run along to a professor, then. See how much good it does you. He glanced at his flankers. Some of us prefer to handle things directly. Bowl and Derrick shifted forward, hands moving to their wands, using their sheer size to crowd the corridor. The message was clear, you're not going anywhere. Hermione, Harry said quietly, stepping in front of her. "Get behind us." "I don't need, please." Draco was already moving to Harry's side, his hand drifting to his sleeve. "Let us handle this part." Something in his voice made her pause. She didn't lower her wand, but she stepped back. And then Selwyn drew, and the beaters followed suit, and 3 hexes flew at them in quick succession. Draco and Harry dodged without thinking, months of Whomping Willow training making the spellfire seem almost slow. Draco's knife was in his hand before he'd consciously decided to throw it, and then Bowl was pinned to the wall by his sleeve, his wand arm immobilized, gaping at the blade that had come within a hair of his skin. Derek tried to cast again, but Harry was already moving low and fast, inside the larger boy's guard before he could adjust his aim. A sharp strike to the wrist sent Derek's wand clattering to the floor. The beater swung at him with his free hand, but Harry ducked under the blow and drove an elbow into his solar plexus. Derek folded. Selwyn had barely processed what was happening when Draco closed the distance. He grabbed Selwyn's wand arm, twisted it outward, and used his own wand like a lever, hooking it under Selwyn's wrist and rotating sharply. Selwyn yelped as his grip failed, and his wand spun away. 3 seconds, maybe 4. And then Draco and Harry stood with their wands trained on Selwyn, not even breathing hard, while Bowles stared at the knife, pinning him to the wall, and Derek wheezed on the floor. Hermione hadn't moved. Her wand was still raised, a hex on her lips that she'd never needed to cast. Her eyes went from Harry's steady hands to Draco's knife to the beater wheezing on the floor, and Draco watched her file the information away, not with fear, but with the same intensity she brought to a new spell. "Apologize," Draco said quietly. "To her." Now, Selwyn's face had twisted with humiliation. A 7th year, a few months from graduation, disarmed by children half his age, his muscle gasping for air at his feet. The story would spread. The story would follow him. But Draco's knife was still quivering in the stone behind Bowles' head, and Harry's eyes held something that made even Selwyn's pride crumble. He'd apologized. Through gritted teeth, barely audible, but he'd said the words. So had Bowl and Derek, once they'd recovered enough to speak. The story had spread through Slytherin House within hours. The physical nature of the disarms had disturbed people almost more than the knife. Wizards dueled at a distance. Wizards used Expelliarmus. They didn't close to grappling range and twist wands out of hands like muggles. They certainly didn't take down Quidditch beaters with their bare hands. Barbaric, some of the older students had muttered. Efficient, Blaze had replied. No one had used that word in their presence since. And Hermione had shown up to their next Saturday training session with twice the determination, staying an extra 20 minutes even after the willow had knocked her down over a dozen times. So now she sat at their table and ate their food and argued with Draco about charm theory and helped Harry revise for exams. And if she wasn't exactly accepted by the rest of Slytherin House, she was at least protected. For now, that would have to be enough. Saturday mornings had become sacred. Draco trained every day, rising well before dawn to spar with the Whomping Willow while the castle slept. During the week, he went alone. He could see in the dark far better than Harry or Hermione, and neither of them were eager to stumble around the grounds at 4 in the morning. Harry joined him occasionally, but more often than not he stayed in bed, ear coiled around his torso for warmth. "You are leaving," she'd hiss accusingly whenever Harry tried to slip out early. "You take your warmth with you." "This is betrayal. I'll be back in an hour. Ice falls from the sky. You leave me to endure this alone." Harry usually gave in, but Saturdays were different. Every Saturday, Harry and Hermione joined him in waking before sunrise to spar with the Whomping Willow. "Your footwork is sloppy," Draco called out, dodging a branch that whipped toward his head. "You keep planting your weight instead of staying light." "I'm out trying." Hermione ducked under a sweeping limb, stumbled, and barely rolled out of the way before a thick branch slammed into the ground where she'd been standing. "This tree is actively trying to kill us." "That's the point," Harry offered. He was circling the willow's perimeter, light on his feet, reading the tree's movements with the instinctive focus he always got during training. You stop thinking and start reacting. Know that now. Hermione scrambled back to her feet, brushing dirt off her robes. Her voice lost some of its exasperation. I watched you two disarm Selwyn and both Slytherin beaters in less time than it takes me to cast a knockback jinx. That doesn't come from reading Auror Academy curricula. No, Draco agreed. It comes from getting hit by trees until you learn to move. I hate that you're right. She set her jaw and raised her hands again. Fine, let's go again. Draco grinned. He'd known Hermione would be like this, absolutely terrible at the physical aspects, but too stubborn to quit, and determined to find academic justification for everything. Stop anticipating, Harry said. You're trying to predict where the next branch will come from. Just move when you need to move. That doesn't make any sense. A branch caught her in the shoulder and sent her spinning. She hit the ground with a grunt. Draco called a halt, and the willow's branches slowed, not stopping entirely, but settling into a lazy sway. They'd figured out early on that the tree had different moods. Early morning, before it fully woke up, was manageable. By midday it got genuinely murderous. Not bad, Draco said, offering Hermione a hand up. You lasted almost 10 minutes that time. I have bruises on my bruises. She accepted the hand, wincing, but was already pulling a small notebook from her pocket. That's 2 minutes longer than last week. If I continue improving at this rate, I should be able to match Harry's baseline time by early May. She frowned at her notes. Though I suspect the improvement curve will plateau. I need to identify the specific deficit. Is it reaction time, spatial awareness, or physical conditioning? It's all three, Draco said. That's not helpful. It's honest. How long have you two been doing this anyway? I've been doing some form of combat training since I was 6, Draco said. Hermione's eyes went wide. 6? You wear 6. It's a cultural thing. My father's family has traditions, warrior traditions. Draco shrugged. I started with basic forms and footwork. The sparring came later. Since you wear 6, Hermione shook her head slowly. I've read about Viking training methods, but I thought those accounts were exaggerated. Your family actually does this, still. Has for centuries. She looked at the whooping willow, then back at Draco. That explains rather a lot, actually. And what about you, Harry? I started last summer, Harry said. Before first year, Draco taught me the basics. Hermione frowned. That's only a few months longer than me, but you move like. She gestured vaguely at the willow. Like that? How? Harry shrugged. Draco's a good teacher. I am an excellent teacher, Draco agreed. Harry's also a natural. Some people just take to it. That's not very encouraging for those of us who aren't naturals. Hermione's chin lifted. But I've improved my evasion time by nearly 20%. I'll catch up eventually. Harry and Draco exchanged a glance but said nothing. Hermione caught the look. I will. A soft pop interrupted whatever retort Hermione had been preparing. Young masters and miss. Darby appeared on the hillside, a tray floating beside him laden with cups and a steaming teapot. Darby is bringing morning tea and biscuits. Darby is knowing that training is making young masters hungry. Darby, you're a treasure, Harry said, accepting a cup gratefully. The elf's ears quivered with happiness. Harry Potter is too kind. Darby is also bringing the special tea that Master Draco is liking. Draco perked up. Elfheim tea, it was light and earthy with a subtle energy that made early mornings significantly more bearable. Darby, Draco said seriously, you are the best elf in this entire castle. Darby burst into happy tears. By the time the elf had composed himself and disappeared, Blaise had appeared on the hillside. He accepted a cup of the Elfheim tea. He developed a taste for it over the past few weeks and settled onto the grass with the air of someone who had no intention of ever approaching the whooping willow. I see the morning torture continues, he observed. You could join us, Harry said. I could also set myself on fire. I choose neither. Blaise sipped his tea. Besides, someone needs to observe and provide tactical analysis. You're dropping your left shoulder before you dodge, Potter. It telegraphs your movement. Harry blinked. You noticed that from up here? I notice everything. It's a gift. Blaise examined his fingernails. I simply choose not to apply my observations to anything as vulgar as physical exertion. So Yaukudo this, Hermione said. Theoretically. I'd be magnificent, he smiled blandly. But I prefer to remain an enigma. They sprawled on the hillside as the sun climbed higher, steam rising from their cups. The castle was waking up properly. Now Draco could see students moving past windows, early risers heading to breakfast. The lake glittered in the morning light. It was, Draco thought, a good morning. One of many good mornings they'd had since things had settled. He looked at his friends, Harry relaxed and present, Hermione already scribbling notes about her training deficits, Blaise performing disinterest while quietly cataloguing everything, and felt something warm settle in his chest. This was what he'd wanted. Not just allies, but real friends. People who showed up, who stayed, who fit together in ways that surprised him. He sipped his tea and let the moment be enough. The weeks slipped by in a comfortable rhythm of classes and training and Saturday mornings on the hillside. And then, almost before Draco realized it, the term was winding down, which meant Hermione's anxiety was winding up. You need to stop, Draco said, watching her add yet another color-coded tab to her transfiguration notes. They were in the library, 3 days before exams began, and Hermione had built a fortress of books around herself. You've studied more than anyone in our year. Possibly more than anyone in the castle. There's no such thing as over-prepared. There is when you haven't slept properly in a week. I slept 4 hours last night. That's not properly. Hermione didn't look up from her notes. I'll sleep after exams. Harry, sprawled in the chair beside Draco with a Quidditch magazine, caught Draco's eye and shrugged. Pick your battles, the look said. Draco considered for a moment, then changed tactics. Fine. But you're still coming to the final Jisquil meeting tomorrow, right? That was what they'd decided to call their Interhouse Fantasy Skyball League. It was short for Jiskeltus, which was short for the greatest international Skyball Quidditch league the world has ever seen. Draco had strongly advocated for the name, and Hermione had put it in their charter. We're announcing the end-of-season standings. Hermione's quill paused. That's tomorrow, 4 o'clock. You're in first place, remember. It would be a shame if you weren't there to accept your winnings because you were too busy revising switching spells for the 10th time. 15th, Hermione corrected automatically. Then, after a pause, I suppose I could take a short break for the meeting. An hour at least, maybe 2. There's the awards ceremony, and then we're voting on Michael's amendment proposals. That ridiculous terminology compromise. Hermione's head came up, eyes sharpening. I have thoughts about that. I know you do. 9 pages of thoughts, if I recall. 14 now. She was already reaching for a different notebook. I added a section on precedent-setting implications for future rule changes. Harry and Draco exchanged a glance. Mission accomplished.